It was, how did you get the ride in the OSCA, and how did you meet Briggs Cunningham?
Oh yes, I had a call from the States, and it was Briggs Cunningham, I think. And I said, would I like to go to the States to race at Sebring? Well, of course, I hadn't been to the States by then. I really wanted to go for many, many reasons. One, I wanted to see what it was like. B, it was a place where you could buy coloured nylons for my girlfriends and all sorts of stuff like that. So I obviously jumped at it. And the next thing I know is I'm on a plane, which took quite a long time in those days, and flew over, I think probably via New York, I think, and which was a 14-hour crossing. And then down, of course, to Florida, out to the extraordinary place at Sebring.
So how did the OSCA compare to the cars you'd driven up to that point?
Oh, the OSCA, I think, is one of the most beautiful cars to handle. I mean, it's a car you can throw it into a Christie, a broadside, and so on. I mean, really, I really can't think of any bad side of it. It's a really nice car to drive.
Your first impressions of the U.S.?
Oh, I was very, very taken with the US because, of course, there was no rationing. I've been used to rationing and all that sort of stuff. Here, anything was available. Americans are easy to meet, nice people you get along with, and the circuit was pretty tatty, I must admit. It was an old aerodrome, and the surface and the way of the road wasn't that easy to see. But having said that, it was quite an interesting, quite demanding circuit.
What about Bill Lloyd?
Bill Lloyd, of course, I didn't know. Bill Lloyd, I think, was Briggs Cunningham's nephew, I think, and we got along really well. I can't remember now who drove for how long, but I'm sure we probably would have gone for however long the tank would go for. Actually.
But you were up against the C4Rs, 4 Lancia D24s. How did you gauge your prospects before the race?
Before the race, I didn't think we had a hope in hell of winning, but I certainly thought we ought to be able to win our class and be placed fairly high at the circuit, because Bill was quite a quick driver, and the car, of course, it was really suited to the course as it was to so many different courses. So I thought we had a fair chance of doing reasonably well.
So how did the race unfold for the two of you?
Well, what I do remember that we couldn't see that well. The circuit wasn't obvious. When you had to concentrate quite a bit to stay on where you're meant to be. It rained, of course, an enormous amount, which was a great help with our car. When it's raining, you don't get lockups or any problems like that. It's less hard on the brakes. From the driving point of view, a car like the OSCA was so good that I could so manoeuvrable that it was relatively easy.
What do you think outdid the big cars? Any idea?
Well, the big cars have been Sebring.
Yeah.
Oh, I think the big cars, they could get up to quite a high speed and then have to brake hard to come down from their speed. And I think that they had straight away had brake problems because it was quite a difficult circuit on brakes.
And you also had brake problems.
We had brake problems as well, but it affected us less because we weren't doing the maximum speeds that they were. We were getting up there quite quickly, but we weren't doing anything like the speeds of, say, a 4.9 Ferrari.
But you didn't just win, you were 5 laps ahead. How could that be?
You may well ask. I have honestly no idea. I think the reason it happened, frankly, was the weather. The conditions were so poor, and the visibility was so low that if you worried about rain, which I didn't. I mean, I genuinely enjoyed rain because other people hated it so much, and I think I was able to drive faster in the bad conditions than say Briggs and other people like that with their fast cars were.
So, do you remember what you were thinking in the 11th hour?
I'm sure I would have been thinking of the 11th hour, hold on. Everything, actually, as far as I remember, I think everything was okay with oil pressure, all these sort of things, and the car had been behaving particularly well, so I wasn't particularly worried.
What was the best and the worst about the OSCA?
The worst thing about the OSCA, I suppose, really in that race certainly was the brakes, because the brakes really weren't that good. The best thing about the Oscar, of course, is a perfect balance. You go into a corner and you drive it, and you could give it a bit of a tweak, and the back end would brake, and you could handle the car that well. It's a really driver's friend, you know, very friendly.
You now own OSCA, which says a great deal about your feelings about the cars. Does that go all the way back to Sebring?
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, I'm very lucky because I happen to have the only desmodromic valve Oscar there is in the world, or ever was, designed by Maserati. And I think it was about 54 when Mercedes came out with it, and I think he thought, my gosh, it's a great idea, and he developed this, which of course I didn't think I had that at Sebring. In fact, I'm sure I didn't.
So the big question is, how much were you paid to drive?
Expenses.
Oh, really?
Oh yes. I mean, I was a professional driver, and I think probably Briggs gave me a present, yeah. But it was not. That wasn't high on the agenda.
So Sebring in '54, you win in the little OSCA. 14 months later, you made your epic drive in the 300 SLR. Any way to compare these two drives and how your career progressed so quickly? Well,
I think the comparison you can get is that they were both cars that were easy to drive, responsive to the throttle, and in those days, of course, mediocre brakes, because don't forget, only Jaguar had disc brakes because they weren't allowed to be on anybody else's car, so that brought in another problem. The SLR, I mean, was in my mind was probably the greatest sports car ever designed or built, and so it didn't have disc brakes, but otherwise the car had enormous middle range power. You could steer them, both of them, not just one, on the throttle a lot, so you could really race them. Quite easy cars to race.
And your lasting memory of OSCA and Sebring, how would you wrap it up?
I'd say Sebring a pretty crappy circuit, actually. OSCA, I would say, is probably one of the nicest cars that I ever raced.